Tuesday. That means Stephen Nathan. Good to be with you. How do you describe yourself nowadays, Stephen? Obviously founder of 10X, but you're not there anymore. Mr. Garden Lever?
Yeah, someone who is just very interested in what's going on around us and trying to make some sense of all of the incredible news that's happening on all fronts. I mean, we saw the climate change report come out, I think yesterday. There's just a lot happening, Alex. So I'm trying to, make some sense of all of this.
Climate change is interesting. It's something that hasn't quite really hit our headlines or our consciousness here in South Africa. Of course, we know that Eskom and Sasol are in trouble as a result of what they're putting into the air. But it's starting to become a real front and center issue now globally. I see Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, our partners are giving it an enormous amount of airtime. Is it something we should be paying more attention to?
I think so. I think we've kind of passed that inflection point where it's sort of, a little bit of a side issue that we think there could be a problem at some time far into the future, where it's now really taken front and center stage. And it's really interesting, if you look, for example, at BlackRock. BlackRock is the biggest asset manager in the world. They're also the biggest index fund manager in the world. And their CEO, Larry Fink, has been incredibly vocal about climate change and about ensuring that the companies that they invest in adhere to much stricter principles and comply with climate change. It's a bit ironic because index funds previously were criticized for not being good owners. You just kind of track the index and you don't exert any influence on management, and you don't, do things like ESG or executive compensation. And now what we've seen is BlackRock actually are at the fore. And wherever you look, I think that companies are being forced to take it far, far more seriously. So, this is, I think this is something that's going to be on the top 3 agenda item for, most companies. Certainly, if you're directly impacted like a Sasol, as you mentioned. Sasol is one of the biggest offenders, certainly by its size. I think this is going to be, as I say, a top 3 agenda item that you're going to have a very clear strategy to become carbon neutral and to do your bit to save our planet.
And also be careful, and the pendulum always swings in these popular crusades from one side to the other. And I guess our job as journalists is to remain skeptical, to question everything, to try and get a balance, because that's not the way society works. Mr. Market in stock markets, and certainly in society generally, it's almost like you get this crowd approach that drives towards something. But there seems to be a crowd approach in your part of the world, in the Cape. We are seeing increasingly these calls now for secession by the Western Cape. Linda van Tilburg had an excellent interview with Roelf Meyer, which we're going to hear a little bit later in the program this evening, talking from his perspective. He says, no, it's a lot of rubbish and, it's crazy talk. But it might be from where he's sitting in Pretoria, but for people in the Western Cape, it's becoming something more than just a fringe element.
Yes, I think that, if you look at the provinces in South Africa, and if you look at their sort of economic performance, the performance at the local government level, service delivery, Western Cape stands out head and shoulders. And as a city, as the metropolitan, Cape Town stands out head and shoulders. It's by no means perfect, but certainly on a relative basis, it's an enormous standout. And that's why we're
celebrating again today, Stephen, the Cape Town International Airport, the #1 in Africa for the 6th successive year. So it is just one of those, again, one of the pats on the back. And of course, the Western Cape will keep telling us how clever they are in certain respects. But what Roelf says in that interview is that the Western Cape cannot survive on its own economically. What would you think about that?
I saw that. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I'll tell you why. If you look at a country like Namibia, Namibia only has a population of 2.5 million people. Western Cape has got over 7 million. So from a kind of critical mass perspective, Western Cape would be about 3 times bigger than Namibia. And what's also interesting about Namibia is if you look at their GDP per capita. So GDP per capita, Alec, as you know, is it's a measure, it's a proxy for kind of the wealth of a country and the wealth of the average citizen, because it looks at the output per average citizen. Now, South Africa, our GDP per capita is just over $5,000 per year. Namibia is over 9,000. So, here you've got a country that's much smaller and on a per capita basis is much wealthier. By all accounts, a lot of the information, and I think the news that a lot of us read through Namibia, it's once again, relatively well-run country in many regards. So I don't think that size aspect is, in and of itself, I don't think that is a valid argument. There are a lot of countries around the world for various reasons that are small and that are very successful. Singapore, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. Now, I'm not saying one can exactly say it's a one for one, but I don't buy that argument. I think there will be a lot of challenges. There's challenges from a constitutional perspective and from a legal perspective, and then there's challenges with I heard Roelf Meyer talk about the interconnectedness. How do we get goods between, if let's assume that Cape Town or Western Cape was to break away, what taxes and what excise duties, and we can see that happening in Brexit. It's very difficult to make rules around, people movement of goods, movement of people, taxes, corporate profits. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think that would be a big challenge. But I think this argument about size, that I certainly don't buy.
Okay, size-wise, China is the biggest population in the world. I think 1 in 5 people on Earth are Chinese. So if something happens in China to the economy, it affects the rest of us. The Delta variant, which seems to have swept through South Africa and is now on its way down, has just hit or just started in China, something they are getting terribly concerned about, locking down whole cities as a consequence of it, and not importing as much oil. And the oil price fell 4% yesterday as a result of that news. Is this something that we, again, might have forgotten about, that China hasn't had that many COVID cases, even though it came from that country? And if you get a seeping out of a highly contagious variant like Delta, that it could actually have an impact on the global economy that we haven't worked into the numbers yet.
Well, it's always interesting to know what we have worked into the numbers and what we haven't. But I think the overarching issue here is that COVID is a really unpredictable disease that we haven't got on top of, and no one is immune and no one is safe. And as you say, China seemed to, certainly they got out of it. They went into it the fastest. They locked down the quickest, and they got out of it the fastest. So they've done an exceptional job, but it doesn't mean that they are out of the woods and they can declare victory against COVID. And I don't think any country can. What I would say is that if you were looking at a country that could manage any subsequent waves and manage spreading of it, I think that China would be right at the top in terms of their ability to get on top of this and to control it. Because just look at their track record. They are, I think, of all the large economies, I think they're the only large economy where their economic output, their GDP, is basically higher than what it was pre-pandemic. So it just talks about their ability to react to these things, and often there are it's quite a strong hand of government, and human rights is not always first and foremost. But I think that the ability to contain it is right at the top of any country in the world. And the markets, as you know, Alec, the markets of they kind of look to profit from any short-term movements, and to kind of if you're going to panic first. If you're going to trade first. And what we've seen with the oil price, as you say, it's come off a bit. It's only off about 8% from its high. So that's not an enormous decline. And we must also remember that it's up 30% this year. The oil price Brent crude was at about $54 at the beginning of the year. It's now at 70. I think it peaked at about 77, 78. So we've got to see where it's come from. And in April of last year, it was below $20. So I don't think it's definitely not an all fall down scenario. And even if you look at the economic forecasts for China for GDP this year have been about 8.5% to 9%. And now what we're seeing is some of the economists are saying, well, because we see infections rising, that might have an impact on output, and they're kind of reducing those forecasts from, let's say, the 8.8 to the 8.3. So it's about 0.5% of GDP. But when your GDP is almost 9%, that's not as bad as, let's say, South Africa, where you've only got about 1 or 2% to play with. So I think it's too early to get overly concerned about it, but it's obviously something that markets are watching.
Just on a more specific thing locally, as we close off with the last two little points, Spoo Shabalala, Adapt IT, a fairly regular visitor to our studio, seemed terribly gentlemanly in the engagement we had with him. Not so much what we saw in court papers and the coverage in the popular press. And today he stepped down from the company that he's helped to build. It just shows, I suppose, that a reputation can take a lifetime to create and can be gone in an instant.
Yeah, it's very sad, as you say, because I also, have met Spoo a few years ago, and I was impressed, with the company he built. I think he was a founder of Adapt IT, and it's grown that from a small business into a sizable by South African standards and successful business. And it's really sad to see someone like that who has made such a great contribution on the business side to fall along the way. And I don't think we know exactly what has transpired, but I think it's fair to say that the behavior that was, as you say, that was sort of mentioned in court papers and in the popular press took a lot of people by surprise, even those people that had worked closely with him. So I don't think we know the full story yet. Maybe it'll come out at some stage, but it's disappointing. And on the other hand, maybe it's commendable for the business community that they actually have dealt with this quite quickly, and from a business perspective, haven't let it linger or taint their business. So maybe that is a positive that we can take out of it, is that there was accountability and this was dealt with in a reasonably quick period. And the business can go on, and the business must go on, because in cases like this, the business is more important than the personality, especially when there is reputational issues that might impact the business and impact all their employees and their customers as well.
And finally, Medupi, the explosion. Just seems like the chaos that was created by the ANC's Chancellor House appointing Hitachi. They got into big trouble through bribery in the United States. They had to pay a big fine for that. And clearly they didn't do a good job at Medupi. I think it's 7 times over the budget and however many years late. And now an explosion, which I haven't heard of an explosion before. I'm sure there must have been in power stations or coal-fired power stations. You do hear about the very rare one and very well publicized ones for nuclear power stations. Of course, Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and I think a recent one in Japan. But coal-fired power stations blowing up, my goodness.
Yeah, it's kind of when is the pain going to end? And for me, a couple of points. I mean, the one is it just shows you, why state-owned entities and government, for that matter, should play a much smaller role in the economy, because their ability to deliver is just not at the level of a private sector. And when you have these enormous projects, these are projects. They're not immaterial projects. They're projects that, that have a material impact, both from a financial perspective, as you say. The sheer cost overruns are outrageous. So that puts enormous pressure on the government, on national treasury, on our tax receipts, on our expenditure. And then also it's a key function and service in the economy is electricity. You can't have a strong economy and a cost-effective and competitive economy if you can't keep electricity output, and you can't do that cost effectively on a competitive stage. So it's really, really sad to see this. Not unexpected, but sad. And I guess the issue for the country would be, well, at what stage do we get these power stations right, or how do we address it? Is it an issue? One of the classic kind of concepts in economics and in psychology is this thing of a sunk cost. We spend some money and then we get attached to the money we spent, and we keep on investing more. And you've got to be careful that it doesn't become a bottomless pit. Now, I don't know where we are with Medupi. I think it's probably, it might be beyond that. But it really, I think Eskom has got to, show the country a way forward that that shows us that we are investing, these investments are still justified, and what is the long-term path to get us sustainable and to get us low cost and competitive. And then obviously we're talking about, how do we even then get to the renewable energy part. So there's a lot for Eskom, I think, to answer for this one. But it is, as you say, how many own goals can we score on this project?
And hopefully somebody in Pretoria will realize that this so-called capable development state is a myth. We have in this country an incapable development state. Take the medicine, take the pain, look forward, and let's start getting onto a path that we can all build on. Stephen, Nathan, as always, good to be talking to you on a Tuesday.